Hello? Hi. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be here and do this talk with all of y'all. My name is Nena Sani. Um, a couple of years ago, someone asked if I'd like to do a TED Talk. She knew of my personal and professional journey and thought I had something useful to share. And that's when the seeds for this moment right here were sown. I didn't know then where or when I'd be doing the TED Talk, but I knew that I'd do it someday. I share this because events don't happen at random. They're caused by patterns of behavior over time that are made possible by structures which are informed by mental models, beliefs, assumptions about the world. And I talk about these patterns and this talk is about those patterns and the structures or systems that make them possible. I have for a while believed that I have something worthwhile to share with the world, and have therefore been working as a coach and a researcher, and also a systems thinker, conducting pro bono workshops on systems thinking and leverage points across industries, socioeconomic backgrounds, age groups, and nationalities for the last 2.5 years. I have read more books and papers than I can remember. I have listened to many, many interviews and podcasts, and I have spoken to hundreds of people as a worker, researcher, and a consultant over the last decade. I have also co-authored a book on the culture of Zomato and written another on systems of grace. I've also written a very large variety of articles and posts, all to clarify my own thinking. All this just to say that I've done the net practice that gives me the grounded confidence to stand on this stage today. There's another pattern that I've repeated over time. That pattern of behavior has led to ruptures in my personal life more than once. 2.5 years ago, I did what I had done hundreds of times before. I walked out mid-fight for the nth time on someone that I loved deeply. And that was the end of my engagement with him. 10 years earlier, the same pattern also led to the end of my marriage with someone else. I share this because I'm a PhD researcher studying how adults can learn under conditions of pressure. I coach founders and CEOs of multi-billion-dollar businesses on how to build generative organizations and regulate their own nervous systems. The question that I seek to ask and answer is this: how may we design containers that allow human beings to learn and thrive, especially under conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity? When the stakes feel high, when the pressure is high. I ask this because if I can't figure this out in my own life, how can I possibly help others do this within their organizations? 18 months ago, I moved back home to Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar to live with my mother and brother after 20 years of being away. For someone whose survival strategy has always been to exit, this wasn't sentimental. This was largely experimental. See, I grew up with an alcoholic, abusive father. And when you grow up in an environment like that, you learn some things very, very early on. You learn to read the room. You learn to anticipate danger. You learn to stay alert. And you learn to leave before you can be left, leave before you can be hurt. Those adaptations aren't flaws. They're the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. They're actually a form of intelligence. The problem, however, is that we carry these patterns forward unconsciously into new systems. What protected me as a child followed me into my adult relations, into my work, into how I handled conflict, feedback, and trust. And so, this time around, I decided to stay. Not because it was easy, but because I wanted to test something that I had been preaching to others for a while. What happens if we don't give in to the urge to exit? What happens when we don't necessarily give in to this amygdala hijack that sends us into a state of freeze, fawn, fight, or flight? What happens if we take a pause? And here's what I found out. Learning happens when we stay present, even if we don't momentarily feel safe. The difference, however, this time around was regulation. The nervous system does not know how to distinguish between physical and social threats. being attacked, being shamed, being made to feel disposable, being judged, to the brain and the body, all of it is threat. This, when threat dominates, three things stop happening. Curiosity shuts down, connection shuts down, and learning shuts down. This isn't physiology. This isn't psychology, it's physiology, it's biology. Living systems don't process information like machines. They make meaning through relationship. What that means is that learning isn't individual and thriving isn't performance. Thriving is coherence, the capacity to remain in relation even when you are under conditions of pressure. And that's what started emerging at home for me. Not perfection, not harmony, but the capacity to have hard conversations without rupturing, to pause instead of explode, to stay instead of flee. And I'll tell you what that translates to in lived experiences. I did a course in neuroscience, one in systems thinking. I signed up for a master's program at MIT and a PhD here in Aurangabad. I also learned how to do assisted backflips and handstands, and I can now speak in Marathi, a language that I couldn't when I was growing up here as a child. And what that did for me is be able to appreciate the nuance in the conversations the speakers here had before I came on stage. Now, here's why this matters beyond my personal life as well. For the last century, we've organized our understanding of human growth around a pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs: survival at the base, then safety, then belonging, then esteem, and finally self-actualization at top. The implicit promise that once you secure the lower needs, you can transcend them. It's elegant, it's tidy, and it's shaped how we design everything: our schools, our workplaces, our educational institutions, leadership models, our very definition of success. But here's the trap. The pyramid makes us believe that achievement will heal attachment, that once we climb high enough, academically, professionally, socially, the need for belonging will become optional. The unfortunate truth is, the reality is that's not true. It's not how it works. What actually happens is that this need goes underground, and it starts running our systems from below the surface. I see this constantly at my work with leaders in large organizations, brilliant people, driven people, people who genuinely have every economic incentive to want to learn and evolve. And yet, the systems that they've built or inherited make it unsafe for them to learn. Because people who grew up being hard on themselves often struggle to make it easier for those who come after them. Systems that have been built on guilt and shame and over-accomplishment have infinite scope creep for judgment, anger, and resentment. And when the structure is threat-based, learning shuts down. So here's what I'm proposing today. I'm proposing that growth doesn't happen in a pyramid, it happens in a double helix like a DNA. One strand is inner coherence, compassion, self-regulation, our capacity to stay regulated under pressure. The other is relational coherence, the safety and trust between people within a system. When both strands spiral upwards, we move towards learning, creativity, and towards our full potential. But when one strand degrades, the other will for a while compensate, but then eventually start trending towards burnout. You can perhaps white-knuckle your way through sheer regulation for a while, or lean entirely on relational support when you're dysregulated, but eventually something will give. And this explains something critical. Individual resilience is not enough. You can be the most regulated person in a room, but if the relational field is toxic, if there is no psychological safety, if there is no trust, there is no legitimacy, you will shut down. The reverse is also true. Psychological safety alone is not enough. You can have the most supportive team, the most supportive teachers in the world, but if the individual hasn't developed their own capacity to be able to regulate, if every spike of uncertainty triggers freeze, fight, or flight, the system can't learn. You need both strands moving upwards. And when they do, that's what I call systems of grace. Not the absence of conflict, but the architecture that allows us to stay in relationship under pressure. And I'd like to show you what that looks like visually. So can I please invite my coach Akshay on stage? At 40, I started learning how to do handstands, not to prove anything to anyone else, but just because I believe that individuals, especially adults, can continue to learn. I could perhaps do a handstand on my own right now, but given that I don't know how stable this ground is and the stakes are high and the risk is public, I don't want to rely on individual strength alone. Yeah. Thank you. What you witnessed right now wasn't balance, it was coherence across the system. My inner regulation, breath, engagement of my core, and also the relational trust, knowing that someone has my back, both strands spiraling upwards. This is not a metaphor. This is what learning looks like under pressure. Not independence, but interdependence. So here's what I'd like for you to walk away with today. The next time someone in your system isn't learning or evolving, a direct report, a child, a partner, or even yourself, don't ask what's wrong with them or what's wrong with me. Ask perhaps, what conditions would allow them to stay present under this pressure? Because the problem is almost never the person, it's mostly the architecture. We've been building pyramids, optimizing for individual achievement, treating belonging as though it's optional once we're successful enough. But living systems don't work that way. We need structures that allow both strands to spiral upwards, our inner regulation, compassion or personal mastery, and relational safety or generative social fields. Not one or the other, but both. For me, that is the architecture of thriving. Thank you so much for giving me your time and attention today.